My name is Rachel Hayes, and I still have the scar on my left palm from falling out of an apple tree when I was 8, a tiny white crescent that catches sunlight and reminds me how things that split can heal, but never quite go back to how they were. It's a small, stubborn souvenir, so am I. I tell you that because if you want to understand why I didn't run when the invitation came, why I walked straight into a living room full of smiles that smelled like cinnamon and compromise, you should know I've always been the kind of woman who sees the whole tree instead of the fruit on a single branch. They had ignored me for most of the year. Calls went unanswered, texts read and never returned, birthdays passed with polite distance. I watched their lives from afar, photos of Sunday dinners and new cars posted like proof that life hummed on without me. I told myself there were reasons: illness, forgetfulness, grief, the kind of slow estrangement families sometimes slide into. I told myself I was being melodramatic. Mostly, I told myself whatever I needed to sleep. Then my mother called the first week of December. "Christmas won't be the same without you," she said, voice light with rehearsed warmth. "You should come home, please, Rachel." I almost hung up. Instead, I drove the 3 hours back to Greendale because I wanted to see the faces that had gone quiet, to feel the shape of the silence. The town was dusted in snow, Main Street stringing its lights across telephone poles, evergreen wreaths hung on every lamppost like pressed promises. Greendale looked like a postcard someone had staged to hide the fingerprints. They met me at the door with arms that didn't quite close. My father held his briefcase like a shield. My mother's smile felt like a curtain pulled over an empty mouth. Ben, my younger brother, waved and then looked away, eyes darting like someone rehearsing lines he had to say but didn't understand. They had spent months practicing politeness. I had spent months rehearsing how to take a knife without reaching for it. "It's good to have you home," my mother said. Her hair smelled of hairspray and peppermint. She touched my arm the way someone touches a painting they can't quite figure out, a painterly appraisal, not a greeting. "Thanks," I said. I let the sentence trail, letting them fill in whatever they hoped it would be. They fed me. They laughed on cue. They asked about my job and my friend circle, and the small town I'd traded for a city job 3 years ago. I handed them the facts. They handed me reflections. Around the coffee table, I watched them like an investigator watches a crime scene. Patterns stick out when you're trained to look for them. Who blinked when certain topics came up? Who checked a phone under the table? Who laughed too hard at a joke meant to cut? The first night, I slept in my old room. The quilt smelled of dryer sheets and the memories of a life that had once included me. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of muted voices downstairs, my father and husband talking on the porch. It was nearly midnight. Snow pressed a muffled silence to the windows. I went to the landing and leaned over the banister. Light pooled around the kitchen where Daniel, my husband of 5 years, stood beside my father, hands tucked deep into his coat pockets. "You'll have to handle it," my father was saying. "She'll have questions. She always does." Daniel's laugh was thin. "Rachel always wants to see the truth. That's why she has to think this is a family thing." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. For a sick moment I pictured them as architects of a play, of which I had been unwittingly cast as the lead. Daniel, my Daniel, who still had a way of tucking his thumb under my jaw when we fell asleep on the couch. My Daniel, who had spent the last 2 months working late and whose explanations had been soft as gauze. My father, my blood. 2 men talking about me like a problem to be solved. I walked down the stairs and stood in the doorway listening. They didn't see me. "Handle it how?" I asked quietly, the kind of question that can break a seismograph. They turned like their conversation had been a campfire and I'd been the match. Daniel said nothing. My father's face tightened into an expression I recognized, the look of a man who prided himself on control. "It's nothing," my father said briskly. "You're up late." "Am I?" I said. "What day is it?" Ben came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. He stared at me and then sank into a chair. The table was strewn with eggnog and dessert plates. The lights outside winked obliviously. That night, under the small constellation of family ornaments, I didn't sleep. The words my father had used, "handle it," tinkled in my head like coins down a well. I started to fill the silence with questions, and I realized the only way to not drown in them was to find answers. In the morning, the house glowed with normalcy. My mother was a portrait of domestic cheer. "We're so glad you came," she said, and for a fraction of a second her eyes went somewhere else. To the mantel, to the framed photo of us at my graduation, to a place she didn't want me to see. Daniel kissed my cheek like a man greeting a houseguest. His mouth tasted faintly of whiskey and cologne. I hugged him and felt the tense muscles in his back like a wire strung taut over a bridge. The rest of the day followed the rhythm of ordinary holidays. Decorating the tree, opening boxes of old ornaments, drinking cocoa by the fire. The family banded together to orchestrate intimacy. And I watched, slow as winter melt, constructing a plan in the architecture of my anger. If they were going to make this a show, if they were going to invite me only to keep me close while they decided what to tell me, then I would not be a silent audience, I would be the director. It started with small things. I began to listen to entire conversations instead of the parts that felt safe. I noticed where the questions came in and where the answers emptied. I checked my messages more carefully than I had in months. I pulled my husband aside one evening and asked, "Are you happy?" He shrugged like someone shrugging at the weather. "I'm fine," he said, with the same shrug he had given the morning I left my job. "We're fine, Rach." When you love someone, you can mistake their evasions for grace. I had been doing that for a while, but there was a new coldness in him I hadn't felt before. The distance of a man holding a secret close to his ribs. The next morning, when he went out to meet a client and left his laptop on the kitchen table, unlocked, I slid it open like it was the first page of a book I had a right to read. It felt like trespass and vindication in equal measure. At first, I didn't find anything concrete, some travel itineraries, a string of messages from an unsaved number that began and ended with emojis, a calendar cluttered with entries labeled meeting. There were, however, receipts that didn't fit his usual pattern, hotel bookings in a town called Ashbourne, funds moved from accounts I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I scrolled. I took screenshots. I did what people do when they've lost their map, collect pieces of the landscape and hope they spell a route. That night I met with a friend from back home, Claire, who knew Daniel from his college days. She came bearing coffee and a look that translated into, "I've been waiting for you to notice." She had been in the middle of her own life, but she had also become an accidental archivist of ours. She had saved receipts, noticed suspicious check-ins on social media, and had the patience of a woman who's been betrayed by small things and wanted someone else to see them too. "You should get everything," she said. "Print it, record what you can. If it's more than an affair, if it's money, if it's complicity, you need documents. Lawyers like paper." I wrote it down. Daily logs, dates, times, the name of the hotel, calls, the way Daniel stopped looking at me, the way you look at a person you know intimately. The next week, I installed a simple recording app on my phone. It felt invasive, but it felt right. I began collecting truth like a miser collects coins. The thing about plotting is that it demands patience. Many women think of revenge as a shout. Mine was a ledger. I learned who in my family had access to what: my father's tax documents, my mother's social calendar, Ben's emails that were more public than he realized. I discovered that their forgetting of me had not been a lapse. It had been a neat erasure. Over the past year, bills had been rerouted, my name removed from accounts I thought were joint. Daniel had called me careless in conversations with others, as if the truth could be written off as temperament. They were unspooling me. What they hadn't counted on was that erasure leaves a trail. People who think they can scrub someone's life forget about inertia. Old accounts still hold statements, names are typed into search bars, and love, once shared, has a stubborn memory in the way you keep photographs even after you've thrown the frames away. 2 days before Christmas Eve, I got the break I was waiting for. Daniel and my father were down in the den, voices low but urgent. I stood by the doorway with my phone in my hand, pretending I was looking for a sweater. From the bite of their exchange, I wrote down phrases: transfer before end of month, title in Ben's name, quiet will make it easier. It was enough. Quiet would not make anything easier. I spent the next 48 hours preparing for the one scene where they couldn't move the furniture: Christmas dinner. I invited one additional guest, a woman Daniel thought was someone else's problem. Her name was Maria Alvarez. She answered my text with one word: when. She had been Daniel's client, and apparently more, in the way small towns overlook the overlap between business and betrayal. She came to my apartment that evening bearing a folder of printed emails, a ledger of transfers, and a photograph of Daniel and her in a hotel lobby, laughing too close to the camera for comfort. We placed the evidence into envelopes and marked them for the family. I drafted a letter to accompany them, one that would not shout, but would strip the scene like a stage director pulling back the curtain. It read, in part, "You invited me home for Christmas after months of silence. That's a kindness I cannot accept as coincidence. I have tried to understand. I have also learned. For the sake of everyone who deserves truth, I am keeping the lights on." Claire, Maria, and I arranged the night so that my family could not control the flow. We timed everything like a heist without the robbery: a little bit of truth, gently placed, a public exposure that would leave them no room for misunderstanding. The house smelled like rosemary and roast. The tree stood like a patient sentinel. Ben carved the turkey like a man trying to prove normalcy with a knife. We sat in a circle and passed plates like liturgy. My mother said a grace that felt stitched together from prayers she read online. I watched people fold into ritual. I felt the kind of anxiety that is an animal, low in the belly, pacing, listening for the moment to pounce. I put the envelopes on the side table where everyone could see them, not hidden, not dramatic, just there, like a sugar bowl. My hand did not tremble. "Rachel, what's that?" my mother asked, puzzled. She moved toward them as if they were foreign objects. I poured myself more wine, letting the pause stretch. I met Daniel's eyes. For once his face didn't have shelter. There was no poker hand to hide behind. He looked like a man who had been caught folding a map wrong. "It's a present," I said, soft as a lid being lifted. "Open it." Someone laughed, nervous. Ben made a joke about my being dramatic. My father cleared his throat and suggested I was trying to make the holiday about myself. That was the old tactic. Make the accuser look unstable. My mouth tasted metallic. "It's simple," I said. "You always invited me here when it was convenient. You stopped returning my calls. You started moving things away from me. You made arrangements behind my back." I watched the words land. I had imagined speech 1,000 times before. The problem with rehearsals is they never account for the exact color of someone's face when they realize they've been seen. My mother held an envelope. She slid it open with a butter knife. Inside was a hotel receipt from Ashbourne, dated in October. Her hands shook. She read a line of an email aloud, then stopped as if the sound were catching on something sharp. My father laughed at first, the brittle, polite laugh of a man trying to keep the world from tilting. "What is this?" he asked. "It's names and numbers," Maria said, standing. "And dates and transfers, money moved to places it shouldn't be. It's proof." Ben looked like he wanted to flee. Daniel stood and looked like a man about to collect himself into a speech. He opened his mouth and then closed it. "You shouldn't have done this," my father said. "This is private." "This is not private," I said. "This is theft." They blinked. No one expected that word. Betrayal had been a soft, conversational thing in their mouths until I said theft. When you call a thing by its legal name, people who were hoping to keep it sentimental suddenly look like criminals. Daniel tried to spin. "Rachel, it's not what you think. There are circumstances." "Circumstances?" I repeated. "You arranged for property to be titled away from me. You arranged for funds to be moved. You planned to make me a stranger in my own life." There was a rush of noise then, broken phrases, a plea, a denial. My mother's face was wet. Ben stood up, too young and too guilty. My father's jaw worked like a machine. Daniel's hands were fists. I watched them, and I felt that strange, bright calm that comes the moment oxygen returns to a limb that's been numb. I had wanted all along to control the narrative. I wanted truth to be a thing they couldn't deny without looking like liars. I wanted them to lose the romanticism they clung to, the idea that family could be swaddled from malice. "It's not just an affair," Maria said quietly. "He promised me something too. He promised help, financial. It looks like he was moving money around to cover debts, or to hide them." The room spun, and then steadied on the swivel of my own heartbeat. The rest came in pieces. A lawyer's number from Claire, a search for account statements, a printed email where Daniel wrote, "Make it look like an inheritance." My father's name was there in a message about titles. "You should have told me," I said. "You could have told me anything that didn't require me to find it like a scavenger." Ben's confession was the most painful. A series of small, pleading sentences. He had accepted money to sign papers. He was young and foolish and ashamed. He had thought he was helping the family get through something. He had not thought of me. My mother's sobs were a tide. I felt sad for her. She had always walked through life asking people to believe in things they could not see. She had let not seeing become a habit. She had let "we're doing what we have to do" become an excuse. You can make many kinds of choices when you are betrayed. You can forgive, you can rage, you can walk away. I chose, in that moment, all three. But not in the order you think. I forgave in the sense that I stopped believing I could scrub people of their worst choices. I raged in the hidden ledger I compiled over the following days, calls to lawyers, copies made, meetings scheduled, and I walked away from the idea that family meant blind fealty. The climax did not come with fireworks. It came with signatures and a phone call. It came when Daniel, after days of silence and a last-ditch attempt at bargaining, set the papers in front of me and asked me to sign away my share of the house to make things easier. He called it reconciliation. I called it theft with friendly faces. I refused to sign. Instead, I handed the papers back and asked for an accounting. I asked for the steps they had taken, the documents they had altered. When they could not produce them, a lawyer, patient and efficient and not sentimental, explained the next steps. There would be mediation, a review of accounts, a formal challenge to the titles. There would be hearings where family secrets would be legal matters. It felt antiseptic and relieving. They called me cold for dragging the family through courts. They told me I'd ruined Christmas. They called me everything that lambasts a woman who won't stay small. On Christmas morning, the house was quiet in a new way. The tree still sparkled. The town outside was an unblinking postcard. My mother left a note on the kitchen table, a sentence that circled like a hawk. I wanted all of us to be together. I wanted it to be like before. I wanted it to be like before too. But some befores are built on unjust foundations. You can't rebuild unless you take down the rotten planks. People asked me if I had wanted to humiliate them. No, I wanted them to understand what they had done had consequences. I wanted myself to be safe. The path forward was legal, bureaucratic, dry. It also meant my name was restored where it had been erased, at least on paper. It meant money came back into view. It meant Daniel and I signed the papers that ended what marriage we had. Not in a scene of screaming, but in a small office where the overhead light hummed like a small, honest apology. I left Greendale a month after Christmas. Weepy goodbyes were traded for practical ones. My mother called from time to time, voice small and tentative. Ben messaged to say he was sorry and learning to be a man who could be counted on, not who took shortcuts. My father sent a letter, no attempt at defense, just a list of regrets. I moved into a tiny apartment in the city, with windows that looked out on a street that did not know me. I hung my scar on the wall of my own quiet pride. Life didn't bloom overnight. There were lawyer bills and nights when the loneliness tasted like cold metal. There were moments of doubt where I wondered if I had done the right thing, if I had been too harsh. But then there were mornings when I woke feeling lighter because someone else's choices no longer ruled my ledger. There is a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop being someone's shadow. It is not the outcome you imagine in fairy tales. It is practical, keys in your hand, names on your accounts, your own signature on your future. It is also, secretly, an art, the way you fold a life together after it has been torn. In the months that followed, I learned new songs of resilience. I learned to cook a turkey that didn't make me nostalgic in a dangerous way. I planted herbs on my windowsill, rosemary for remembrance, basil for courage, time for something to laugh at when I moved too far into melancholy. I wrote at night about the way light comes into a room. I wrote about the way betrayal felt like being weathered and how the hard parts polished me into someone who trusted less often but trusted herself more. People will tell you that the worst part of betrayal is the betrayal itself. They are wrong. The worst part is the discovery of how many ordinary things you had mistaken for love when they were just habit. But the best part, the hard-won part, is the discovery that you can be the author of your own life, even when others have tried to steal the punctuation. A year on, I went to a small holiday market. Snow fell in polite flakes. The town that had been my proving ground for patience twinkled with the same lights that had once looked like camouflage. I walked through alone, and I felt an odd gratitude, not for the pain, for the lessons. I bought a candle and a small tree sapling for my balcony. I whispered to it, not a prayer, but a promise. Grow. Stand. Be rooted. When people asked me how I had the courage to confront them, I told them it wasn't so much courage as accumulation. I had collected evidence, friends, the right phone calls. I had written dates on pages and made appointments. I had let my anger become a plan. If there's advice in all of this, it is simple. Keep careful records, trust your instincts, and remember that kindness is not the same as erasure. You can love people and still hold them accountable. The house on Elm Street still stands. The ornaments on their tree still gleam for visitors. My family learned some lessons the hard way, and I learned to let go of the idea that family comes with immunity. We sent holiday cards last year, not the glossy kind, but a simple note about growth and recognition. My mother signed hers with 3 words, "I am sorry." It didn't fix everything, but it was something. I tell you this because promises matter. If someone offers you the warm glow of a holiday invitation after a year of silence, check the wiring. If they hand you garlands sewn from excuses, look for the seams. You do not owe your presence to people who have made you a convenience. You do, however, owe yourself the chance to be seen. Not as a quiet support, but as a person with a ledger, a past, and the power to decide what your future will cost and what it will yield. A year and a half later, I found myself sitting on a park bench under a bare-branched maple, watching a child tug a parent's mitten. The sun slid low, painting the street gold. My hands were empty. My heart, which had once been common property, beat in a chest lined with its own rules. I thought of forgiveness not as a surrender, but as a door I could open on my terms. I thought of the scar on my hand catching the light like a small moon. I smiled. The snow began to fall, each flake a little erasure of the day. But there are some things you don't want erased. The lessons, the courage, the way your spine remembers to straighten after you've been bent. So if you ever find yourself invited home because it's convenient for others, remember this. You can go to sit with the fake warmth, or you can go to lay out the evidence and ask for what is yours. Either way, go with your eyes open, with your ledger in hand, and with the small, stubborn knowledge that healing is a work you do for yourself. In the end, the house lights and the ornaments don't decide who you are. You do.